Hello, my name is John Sebesta, and I'm the editor of the UN Chronicle, the online magazine of the United Nations. This is Chronicle Conversations. I'm very pleased to welcome for today's conversation Jean-Claude Guédon. He is the now retired professor of comparative literature at the University of Montreal, or l'Université de Montréal, and a leading proponent of open access research and publishing. And welcome, Professor Guédon.
Thank you.
So tomorrow is a big conference here. It's the first conference convened by the United Nations on open science. It's the United Nations Open Science Conference, and tomorrow being 19 November of 2019, and it's organized with the Dag Hammarskjöld Library in cooperation with the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, known as SPARC. The theme of the conference is towards global open science, core enabler of the 2030 Agenda. To begin with, I wonder if you could define the term open science for me and for others who might not understand it so well, and what role does that play in moving towards achievement of the 2030 Agenda?
Well, open science is really an extension of open access. The whole battle that started in the 90s about access to scientific literature and access to knowledge in general went on and on and on, and more slowly than many of us were hoping for. But it essentially won a very large victory in extending itself into open science. And open science, to do it quickly, is really looking at science from two different perspectives. On the one hand, you keep in mind the workflow of the scientist or the researcher in general, even in the humanities, going from the lab bench or the library all the way to the publication. And you have all these interesting things in between before you write your paper, and then you publish it and it's evaluated and so on. And in there, now we want to see the whole flow. In other words, we are becoming to understand that it's important to have access to the data, to the software that allows to treat the data, to the explanations on how to run your experiment, things of integrity, of replicability, and questions of that order are emerging ever more clearly because of that. So open science is opening up the process of science all the way to that thing that's going to be discussed by people. Call it an article. I like to call it a crystal of knowledge.
Crystal of knowledge.
But it's poetic. But this is the first axis. The second axis is that science has often been viewed as something quite elitist, limited to a few people, speaking to each other, and a bit esoteric, to say the word. Science can irrigate, exactly like a river, many other fields. For example, civil servants need answers before when they make up decisions or help make up decisions. Teachers in non-university research areas would be helped by having a lot of recent information that they can read, to the extent that they can read it, of course. The general public, the patient who is sick, who wants to know about his or her disease, may want to have access to the literature to at least try and understand what's going on, what's happening, and if the solutions proposed are the best ones. So think of science opening up to the whole of society in various ways. And then there is the movement in the other direction. From society to science, we now have, thanks to the internet, lots of examples where regular people are really making a contribution to science. For example, the so-called zoo, the Galaxy Zoo, which is a classification of galaxies by people to see whether there are elliptical galaxies or spiral galaxies, and they found new types of galaxies. Folded, which is about the protein folding problem, which is hellishly complicated. They are having there too a lot of success doing these kinds of things. So open science, the whole of science becomes transparent and visible to those who do science. Open science, it goes into the whole of society, and society also finds ways to contribute to with the specialist and alongside.
So really science is improved by making it a two-way street.
Very much so, improved, as also better, I would say, political life, because if people see what goes on in science, skepticism to scientific results will be at its right place, which is organized skepticism,
Right.
as Merton, the sociologist, said. You don't want people just saying, this doesn't exist, vaccination doesn't work, the earth is flat. No, that we don't want. But you want people who remain critical to science and do it in a constructive way for that great conversation that science never stops being.
And so this can be useful for the 2030 agenda because it's also a very complex set of, it's not one issue, it doesn't cover one problem.
No,
it
absolutely
covers a
not.
vast range of issues.
Absolutely.
And you really need to be absorbing information from various sources.
And there is something very important because we are the UN. That is the whole planet. That's everybody. Science right now, because of its organization, tends to favor and privilege certain kinds of questions by the way the journals work and how they rank themselves and how they prize themselves differentially compared to other journals. This means all sorts of problems tend to be neglected. And people who do science in poorer countries or in poorer institutions have less of a voice. Not because their work is less quality or lesser quality, but because they are not in the sectors which have been privileged by those who are right now commanding and ordering the communication of science. So it really, I think, opens up science to the whole planet.
That's interesting. In January 2019, the European Commission, as you know, issued the Future of Scholarly Publishing and Scholarly Communication report of the expert group to the European Commission. It's a mouthful. But you know this well. You were, of course, you served as the chair of the expert group and also as a principal editor of the report. And I looked over this report. It's pretty detail-oriented and it's quite thick. But from your perspective, what do you feel were a few of the most important findings of this report?
Perhaps the most important thing, maybe I should take a step back. We're in a world in which all evaluation is done through objects which are controlled by publishers, journals essentially, which are ranked and everything. And the whole difficulty around open access has been how do you conjugate the need to access with what the publishers want in terms of business. You know? So you have and the problem is that they have, in a sense, conflated two different orders of questioning. One is how much market share can we get with our journals for ourselves, and second, how can we also have the same evaluation technique to understand the quality or the value of the research done. So the report at the expert group, we started thinking about what is publishing. And suddenly we realized that the kind of publisher we have is really the heir of the print era publisher. That is, when you, in one place, you had registration, certification, dissemination, and preservation. You know, so the publisher did all that. It had a warehouse to keep things. It sent things out. It evaluated the work done, and it, of course, registered what it was getting in. And we have talked about publishing as a sort of monolithic activity with a monolithic institution on top of it, the publisher.
Right.
Suddenly we came to us that actually each one of these functions, publishing functions, could be spread around. Dissemination could be done by far more than publishers. And the internet, in fact, allows to do that extremely easily. Certification can be done outside of the publishing, can be done by groups of researchers.
You're talking about peer review?
That's right, that's right. And I won't elaborate on that, but you see the thing.
Yes.
So that was one of the main thrusts of this report. It was how can we use the possibility of redistributing the functions of publishing in order to solve a number of problems associated with the monolithic present situation of publishing in the scientific world. Now, that means a number of things. New actors come to the surface. And then you say, well, in this system, if you take really a hard-nosed approach to it, you have those who pay and those who receive the money. Now, the publishers receive the money, and those who pay were traditionally the libraries. You know, buying the stuff. In scientific knowledge, since the Second World War, the price of journals has gone so high that very few individuals subscribe to journals, for example. It's become rare now. In the humanities and social sciences, it's a bit different, but in the sciences, it's quite rare nowadays. So You have a system of journals which is there in place, and suddenly you say to yourself, maybe what we could do is have, for example, an inside-out library which collects all the stuff inside an institution and registers that. Oh, one function already done.
Okay.
Then we have a network of libraries with their universities organizing evaluation teams. Oh, certification has happened. Preservation, libraries know how to do that.
Right.
And as for dissemination, the internet makes it simple. Just very quickly, you see how you can suddenly think about the whole system very, very differently.
Right.
And of course, with a much lower cost, you know.
Which is key to bringing in the involvement of others, places that have been overlooked, as you said before.
That's right. I mean, this is the whole problem presently, is that when you have journals that cost thousands of dollars, a large part of humanity doesn't have access to that. And if you want people to pay up front with the article processing charge, I prefer to call them article prestige charges.
Sure.
Again, the level, $2,500 to $5,000 and even more dollars per article.
Yeah.
Very few countries have the means to support this kind of cost.
And getting back to what you were saying before about the two-way flow of science,
right.
Not only can they not afford the journals necessarily, but they also maybe don't have the means to afford contributing to the journals. So that's another part.
So what the report is essentially suggesting is that probably at the level of infrastructures, funders who have a lot of money and libraries could get together to organize infrastructural devices for platforms where people could begin to circulate their information. And then traditional publishers might want to invent services on top of that, but at a reasonable rate, and only after the basic and really essential parts of publishing have been taken care of.
That's very interesting. So bringing it back to the United Nations level, what do you think the United Nations can do, or the wider international community can do, including the Dag Hammarskjöld Library, which is very involved in a lot of what you're talking about? What can they do to ensure that exchanges of scientific knowledge continue?
It seems to me that the United Nations has a natural role in helping, organizing, and I don't know if it could go as far as supporting financially, but at least helping a lot to coordinate the infrastructure of all this.
Okay.
You know, you need to create platforms which have a regional specificity, say for Latin America or Africa or Southeast Asia and so on. Why? Because in each part of the world, different problems arise, and people need to be recognized for doing that kind of work on these kinds of problems.
Right.
Think of why there are so many neglected diseases. I mean, these are very important and urgent diseases, and yet people don't work until it's really recognized in the North Atlantic.
Sure.
You know, we want to have recognition systems that touch the whole world. And the infrastructure for that is by establishing those platforms where people can show their work and be evaluated for the quality of their work and not for the place where they published, you know,
Very
by the place that they published. And then again, if the publishers want to facilitate this work even further by offering more inventive and interesting services, they're welcome to do that. They'll add the cherry on the pie if you want. But let's build the pie together, and the UN, I think, can do a lot on that.
Oh, great. Okay, and it's hard to get anything. 193 countries to agree on almost anything.
I know.
But this is something I think that would benefit all
everybody,
193.
Everybody. And you could start by small pilot systems in various parts of the world, demonstrate that it's viable, that it's working, that people can be recompensed for doing the kind of research they're doing. And then little by little, you sort of agglutinate that, you create a network of networks, and then you get the world brain at the end of the day, you know?
Start the wheel rolling down the hill, and it'll take off on its own.
That's right, yeah.
Well, this has been really an interesting conversation. I know speaking with you before the interview, I think we could talk all day about these things.
Absolutely.
And I encourage people to find your report online, and if I can, I'll try to put it at the end of the interview here, where that can be found as a URL. But this has been really fascinating, and I hope our audience also feels that way. So with that, we'll conclude this Chronicle conversation. For in-depth analysis and opinion on what's happening throughout the UN system, and more Chronicle conversations, please be sure to visit our new website, which is un.org/chronicle. You can stay up to date with the UN Chronicle by following us on social media, on Twitter and Facebook. And to find out more about the Dag Hammarskjöld Library, which we were talking about earlier, you can check them out at library.un.org. I'd like to thank UNTV again for providing this excellent facility that we've been able to use today, and the Dag Hammarskjöld Library for helping me arrange the interview with Jean-Claude, which has been a great pleasure. And I especially like to thank you.
Thank you.
And just wanted to thank you for taking the time. I know you're a very busy man to come and talk to us today. I think it's important information that we can disseminate here. And thank you all for joining us today.